Okay, let's dive right into this explainer and unpack the monumental and, frankly, incredibly brutal legacy of Vasco da Gama. Now, when we think about the age of discovery, his name is usually one of the very first to pop up, right? He's universally celebrated as this brilliant navigator who permanently altered global history by finally linking the East and the West by sea. But the reality of how he actually pulled this off, well, it is much darker, much bloodier, and way more complex than those standard textbook summaries usually admit. So today, we're going to trace his actual steps, relying purely on the historical record, to get a clear look at both the explorer and the conqueror. To set the scale right away, we really need to put his first journey into perspective. Rounding the southern tip of Africa, sailing all the way across the Indian Ocean to India, and then making it back to Portugal? That covered a distance greater than walking the entire length of the Earth's equator. I mean, it's mind-boggling. This wasn't just some neat navigational trick. It was a physical endurance test of unimaginable proportions for the late 15th century. Combined, the outward and return legs were literally the longest ocean voyages ever completed up to that point in human history.
Section 1. The Race for Spices.
So you might be wondering, why on earth would King John II of Portugal risk sending his men into the absolute terrifying unknown? Well, follow the money. It all comes down to massive economic incentives. At the time, the Republic of Venice basically had a complete stranglehold on the insanely profitable European spice trade. They dominated the old overland routes, working through Egyptian ports in the Red Sea to get to the Indian markets. Portugal was, for all intents and purposes, completely locked out. So to fill up his royal treasury and totally bypass those Venetians, King John came up with a radical plan. Find an untested, completely unproven sea route to Asia by sailing all the way around the continent of Africa. It was a massive, all-or-nothing geopolitical gamble.
Section 2. The Impossible First Voyage.
Let's jump to 1497. Da Gama departs Lisbon, taking command of this fleet of 4 ships, which included 2 of these massive custom-built carracks and a crew of 170 men. And they are sailing straight into the void. Looking at this timeline, you really get a sense of the sheer isolation they dealt with. They had to swing way out into the open Atlantic just to catch favorable winds. By the time they finally saw land again on the African coast in November, they had spent over 3 solid months sailing more than 10,000 kilometers of open ocean. To put that into perspective for you, that was by far the longest stretch humans had ever gone without landfall. Ever. They then creep up the East African coast, eventually manage to hire a local pilot in Malindi who actually understands the tricky monsoon winds, and that finally allows them to cross the Indian Ocean, reaching Kozhikode in India in May 1498.
Section 3. First Contact in India.
Okay, so they pulled off the impossible. They made it to the Malabar coast. The stakes are sky high here. But that very first meeting with the local ruler, the Zamorin of Kozhikode, it was basically a masterclass in reading the room completely wrong. Da Gama just assumed he was dealing with some isolated ruler who'd be blown away by whatever European goods he brought. I mean, look at this list of gifts he actually presented. Some scarlet cloth, a few hats, brass pots, sugar, and some oil and honey. In a fabulously wealthy Indian Ocean trade hub that traded in exquisite gems and spices, this stuff was laughably trivial. The local rulers and the Muslim merchants there were so unimpressed, like literally asking, "Where's the gold and silver?" that they genuinely thought Da Gama was just a run-of-the-mill pirate, not a royal ambassador.
As you can guess, things went south pretty quickly. Da Gama couldn't secure the trade deals he wanted. He was furious that he was asked to pay standard customs duties like everyone else, and he even ended up kidnapping several locals on his way out. Annoyed, frustrated, and just desperate to leave, he makes a catastrophic navigational error. He completely ignores local advice about the onshore monsoon winds.
And here is the brutal cost of that hubris. The trip across the Indian Ocean, going there, riding the summer monsoon, took a quick 23 days. But fighting against those winter monsoon winds on the way back, that took more than 90 agonizing days. The conditions on those ships were just horrific. About half of his entire crew died during this one crossing alone, and scurvy absolutely ravaged the survivors. It got so bad they literally had to scuttle one of their own ships because there just weren't enough men left alive to sail it.
Section 4. An Armada of Vengeance.
Now, the crucial point here is that while that first voyage proved the route was technically possible, it was an absolute diplomatic and human disaster. So when Da Gama heads back to India in 1502, he's no longer an explorer. He comes back as the commander of a heavily armed 15-ship armada, and he is explicitly out for blood. The violence starts almost the second they hit Indian waters.
Da Gama intercepts a Muslim pilgrim ship, the Miram, heading from Kozhikode to Mecca. Eyewitness accounts from the time talk about the staggering, almost unbelievable wealth on board the ship. The passengers were so desperate they offered Da Gama riches that, as the quote says, could ransom all the Christian slaves in the kingdom of Fez and much more, just to be spared. But here's the thing, Da Gama wasn't just there to rob them. He was there to send a terrifying, unforgettable message. Despite them offering him literally unimaginable wealth, he looted the ship anyway, locked the over 400 passengers inside, and yes, that included women and children, and systematically burned them to death. He spared exactly 20 children, and that was solely so they could be forced to convert to Christianity. It was a calculated, horrific act of terror. And sadly, that wasn't an isolated incident. When he arrives at Kozhikode, he demands the Zamorin expel every single Muslim from the city. When the Zamorin refuses and sends his high priest out to negotiate, Da Gama has the priest's lips and ears cut off and then literally sews a pair of dog's ears onto his head. Then he just sits off the coast and bombards the unfortified city for 2 solid days. To make things even worse, he captures a bunch of local rice merchants, cuts off their hands, ears, and noses, and sends all of it to the Zamorin with a note demanding to be paid for the gunpowder he just used to shell the city. This level of calculated brutality did exactly what it was meant to do. It brought local trade to a complete standstill. Section 5. A complex, bloody legacy. Which brings us to the aftermath of all this. What did this unprecedented navigation, combined with this terrifying violence, actually yield? Well, we can see a really stark juxtaposition here. On one hand, King Manuel I completely showers Da Gama with wealth and titles. We're talking a massive royal pension, the absurdly grand title of Admiral of the Seas of Arabia, Persia, India, and all the Orient. And he's eventually made the Count of Vidigueira. But look at the cost side of the ledger. It's devastating. That first voyage cost him 2 ships and over half his men. The second voyage, built entirely on massacres, the brutal bombardment of coastal cities, and the violent shattering of ancient, established trade networks. Despite all the bloodshed, or honestly, maybe because of his reputation for ruthless order, the Portuguese crown still wasn't done with him. Jump forward to 1524, after he'd been away from India for decades, and King John III sends him back. This time he gets the ultimate title, Viceroy. His job is to fix the incredibly corrupt and messy Portuguese colonial government there. But it didn't last. He contracts malaria almost immediately upon arriving and dies in the city of Cochin on Christmas Eve, just 3 months into the job. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a provocative thought to chew on. Vasco da Gama undeniably pulled off a feat of navigation that cracked the globe wide open, kicking off the age of international sea-based trade that essentially built our modern world. Yet, the historical record is crystal clear. He achieved this through acts of outright piracy, horrific mutilation, and mass murder. So how do we reconcile that? How do we properly weigh the maps he drew against the blood he spilled? It's a deeply complex, incredibly dark reality of the Age of Discovery, and it's something we are absolutely still grappling with today. Thanks for exploring this one with me.